Hey everyone, this is Leah. Welcome to another episode of It Might Be You. I have a special guest with me today, John Child. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Leah. And thanks for inviting me on the show. It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm excited because you are the first guy to come on It Might Be You. So, congratulations for that.
No, thank you. It's always like to be first at something.
Yes. Hey, so um, share a little bit about yourself with the listeners.
Okay. Well, my name's John. As you said, I am from the UK and I'm a life coach. In a previous life, in sort of back in 1863, when I first left college and started work, I fell into marketing. And alongside that was designing training courses and delivering training courses. And that kind of developed into coaching people. And then um, sort of fast forward a bit, and I had that moment of it might be me, I guess. And that triggered a change in career and led me into what I'm doing now, which is full-time life coaching and success coaching. And I also teach communication skills as well.
Awesome. So, with that being said, what was your it might be me moment where you decided, okay, I need to change tracks?
Yeah, it kind of started, I would say, about 10 years before it actually happened.
Mhm.
So I'd had a couple of different bad decisions, I guess you could say, where I'd kind of reassessed what was happening at that particular point. But then none of the changes really stuck. And I'd ended up, um, I'd moved across the country for one kind of work, and then I'd changed careers to work in the health service, actually. And I was working in the health service, and I kept finding I was getting really tired and I couldn't understand it. And I was fine on a Monday. By Tuesday, I was useless after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And by Friday, like Fridays, I would wake up and I wouldn't be able to walk across the bedroom.
Mm.
I couldn't understand it. It's really, really odd. And of course, you know what that looks like to your employer. It just looks like I was the king of the long weekend to them. Oh, it's Friday, John's not coming in.
Uh,
So which, I mean, anybody would think that, but I was really confused. Didn't get it at all. And then I had an incident where I was working in hospitals and I was working across different sites, and there was a shuttle bus. So I got on the shuttle bus one day and I couldn't climb the stairs to get on the bus, and I had to be helped on the bus. Again, nobody believed me when I got back to the office and said, "This is really odd." And then I collapsed,
mm.
and I was working late on I think it was a Thursday night, or it might have been a Wednesday, and there was me and my boss, and we were having a chat, and suddenly I'm on the floor, and my legs had just completely given way. So she said, "Right, tomorrow morning, first thing, you're straight to the doctors." And went to the doctor, and after a bit of a chat, they said, "I know what this is. This is chronic fatigue syndrome," which I don't know if you know anything about chronic fatigue syndrome. But it's the closest thing to it is ME, I guess. So it's kind of a non-permanent form of ME, but it's got a really long recovery time. So they said, look, that's what's going on. It takes 3 months for us to diagnose it. I'm signing you off for those 3 months. Don't expect to go back to work for 3 years.
Oh my God.
Right. So this was the first I'd heard of it. And I sort of said, well, I'm in the middle of a project at work here. And they said, not anymore, you're not. So I mean, you can imagine
Yeah.
ringing work and saying, um, it's a bit awkward this, but I've just been told that I'm not going to be back for 3 years. And they just went ballistic, obviously. Um, Now, chronic fatigue syndrome, there's no cure for it. Effectively, you have to wait it out.
Mm.
But you have to rest completely. And the first thing he told is rest physically and rest mentally. And I said, fantastic, because if I'm resting I can read. I'm a real avid reader. I love to read. And they said, no, you can't read. Reading is mental exercise.
Oh my
You have to
goodness.
do nothing. So I'm sat in my sort of four walls looking at the wallpaper and thinking, well, I've never noticed quite how dull this place is. What do? You meditate and you become really introvert, and you start thinking about, well, do I like where I am? Do I, those decisions that made me make those changes before, what was and you realize the common denominator, it happened to me, it happened around me. The one thing that's common to this is me. So maybe I'm responsible in some part for this. If I'm not responsible for the event, I'm responsible for my response to it. And
Yes.
at that point, you say, right, well, what am I going to do if I'm not happy with where I am? I know I've got 3 years. And for the first year, I can do basically nothing. But then I've got to try and work around something. I can't go back to work because I don't know from day to day whether I can get across the room.
Mm.
So as soon as I was able to sort of string a thought together, like, right, okay, what am I going to do? And that was the thing. It was kind of enforced
Yeah.
because I didn't know whether I was ever going to be able to do a full week's work again at that point. So, right, well, I can't work for anybody else because nobody else is going to put up with that. So I'm going to have to do it myself. And that really turned everything around, because it meant that I had to take responsibility for what was going to happen in my future, and really look back on those previous decisions and say, right, what's led me to here? And what can I change about the way that I've been thinking to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and that I can break myself out of, whenever you get hit by something unexpected, you risk falling into a cycle of negativity.
Yes.
We're all human, and I certainly do that. So once you know that and you know what your trigger points are, you can work around them and say, right, how do I avoid this? How do I recognize when it's happening? And how do I make sure that what I'm doing is more than positive thinking? It's planning and moving forward in a positive way. So it's turning that thought into action, I guess. But that was really it. That's a very garbled way of giving you the story, but it was so enforced on me, this whole change. But it turned out to be such a positive experience, actually.
Yeah. And just like, I can't even imagine being told you're not going to be able to work for 3 years.
It was just unbelievable, because who would believe that as well? I mean, I sort of contacted my work and said, I'm off for 3 months anyway, but I'm not back for at least 3 years. And they're like, yeah, right. Yeah, of
Right.
course. Yeah. And I mean, I vividly remember being at this will tell you the kind of environment. I mean, as soon as this was the moment I knew I was working for the wrong organization, because we had a Christmas do. And I made a flippant remark about, sometimes you wonder why you turn up for work. And the whole room stopped. And someone looked and said, well, 4 days a week.
Oh,
I was like,
no.
right, well, clearly you don't believe what's going on here, And but it's that kind of condition where if you're having a good day, you are absolutely fine. But a bad day, you literally, like my living room, to give you an example, after 2 years, I could push a vacuum cleaner. Took 2 years to push a vacuum cleaner across a room. It would take 2 hours to vacuum the living room, and I would have to spend 4 hours recovering,
Oh my
because I'd
God.
be so exhausted at the end of it. Now, it's so alien to most people, that. But, it over time enabled me to study. At the end of the 3 years, I'd finished a degree in health and social care with psychology. I was working for myself, sort of as whenever I could, as a life coach. and helping other people. But it gave me this really unique perspective on life and the importance of routine in life and forming habits that meant you didn't have to worry about what you were doing and why you were doing it. So that was key to recovery, but it was also a key lesson in moving things forward and consistency and success coming from doing small things consistently, not biting off more than you can chew, and actually probably biting off a lot less than you think you can cope with. To build that habit of learning what it feels like to achieve those little things and move forward. I always remember, as I said earlier on, I'm a really avid reader. And I read all kinds of things, but I like biographies. And I read the biography of Jack Welch, who used to be the CEO of GE. And I read it because I used to work for GE back in the day. But one of the things he said was, somebody asked him, how do you make these sort of billion-dollar decisions? How do you take that responsibility on your shoulders? And he said, well, you learn by making small decisions. And you get used to making the small decision, and then you make a slightly bigger one and a slightly bigger one. And you realize that it's not the end of the world if you make the wrong decision. Because the process, it doesn't matter whether the decision's for £10 or $10 or $10,000 or $1 million. The process of making the decision is always the same. The outcome may be different, but the actual decision-making process is the same. Take the information you've got, decide what needs to be done, and then that's it. Then go and do it. So start small and then build up, and that's how you build confidence. And you build confidence out of courage. So I learned a lot from that whole situation, and it stood me in good stead, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, my mind is still just blown, like just thinking, not be able to function for 3 years, because I'm like you, I'm an avid reader, and now I've kind of gone more to the audio books, but I mean, I can listen to and read 2 or 3 books at a time for over
Me
2
too.
years.
Me
So
too. I got myself an Audible account, and it was one of the best things I ever did. And I've got a Kindle now as well, which is a game changer.
yes.
But yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think I'm getting the sense you're like me in that you can't sit still necessarily. You've got to be doing something. You've got to have a project on. And so to be told you couldn't do anything for at least a year while you were in that stage of that recovery was quite amazing. And it was really it just forces you to say, right, well, I'm going to peel back the onion. I'm going to rip all this stuff out, get rid of all this negativity. Because I mean, I'd got, without going into too much detail, I'd had like really early on, my brother passed away. So that was back in the day before, kids had therapy and all that stuff. So I mean, my brother passed away on the sort of the Thursday. I was back at school on the Monday, and then I'd made some disastrous decisions in my early 20s. I was married for less than a year, which was not fun. And that I mean, that's just the start. So to sort of sit down and say, right, let's rip all this out, get rid of the sort of the baggage that's coming with all that stuff. And that was a real lesson, actually, was it doesn't matter who you are and what situation you've got, what your past is like, you're carrying some baggage. And you might not know you're carrying it, because we fool ourselves and we build these identities and these ideas of who we are around the scars. But that's not who we are. Who we are is the person we were before all that happened. And the person you're supposed to be is the person that wasn't affected by that stuff. So if you can identify that, where you've built that sort of wall around that scar tissue, and remove, well, if not remove it, at least accept it and realize what it's doing, you can build around it and become a lot stronger. And it takes away a lot of that uncomfortableness about living. And you're able then to sort of put your voice out there without worrying about whether people care or are upset by it or offended by it, or, or even agree with it. I mean, everybody's opinion is everybody's opinion, but what works as a model tends to work. And so I apply all that with what I now do for a living.
And so with that, making that transition, I know it's kind of a forced thing. Um, how long did it take you to fully recover to be able to start and maintain your life coaching business full time?
I started. I did this. I couldn't do anything for the first year,
Mhm.
and then the second year I started in a small way coaching. I was very lucky in that because of the background I already had the knowledge and I'd already done coaching. I'd coached in a corporate environment, and I'd also worked as a partner with my father on a business. So I kind of had a business background as well at that point. So I had a head start, I'll say. But it was probably halfway through the second year before I was really able to say, even if I'm feeling rough on that day, I'm going to be able to coach.
Okay.
Now, because of the way that I was doing things at that point, I was coaching primarily through Skype, because I built it around a model that meant if I wasn't physically able to move out of the house, I could still do it. That stood me in good stead during the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm used to using Skype and Zoom. I'm quite comfortable on it. I'm a bit garbled on it, as you can tell, but I have no objection to it. I like it as a coaching medium. It's quite nice.
So, do you have any residual, uh, I don't know, I hate to use the word ailments from that time? Do you still
Well,
struggle with?
it was funny. No, I was given the all clear from that, which is depending on which doctors you speak to, either that's possible or it's not. So you'll speak to some doctors who will say that chronic fatigue is non-permanent and will disappear, and that was my doctor. But you'll also speak to other doctors who will say, no, it's always there. But my experience with it is that it disappeared completely after the 3 years. It took a bit more recovery, and it took some. I'd not weightlifted since my early 20s, and I got back into lifting weights at that point, just as graded exercise, really. But what it did do was it masked another condition. So I ended up with, I have a B12 deficiency, so I get an injection of B12 every 3 months. But the symptoms are the same. The fatigue is the same. So it was only probably about 6 months after I was given the all clear, and my partner at the time said, "Well, this doesn't make any sense. You still don't seem to be right." And I went back to the doctors, and they sort of gave me a blood test and said, "Oh yeah, this has developed while you've had chronic fatigue,
Oh my goodness.
but because the symptoms are the same, we didn't pick it up. We didn't bother to test for it." So now that doesn't cause me any issues at all now that it's been diagnosed, because I get the injection and that sort of sits. But yeah, so that was an interesting sort of time as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Just, everybody's story of how they um, evolved or, had to change tracks is so different. And the resounding thing that I keep coming across is that um, the mind body connection is
Yeah.
is very, very strong for me.
Mm.
It was, I developed allergies. Never had allergies in my
Wow.
life, but I would make the joke, "Oh, I'm just allergic to work," because I would have the hives and all that.
Wow.
And then going and getting diagnosed with basically being allergic to everything. I was like, how does this happen? How did this happen?
Yeah.
Um, After starting to work and realizing, oh, okay, some of the reason why I'm manifesting this sickness in my body or this dis-ease in my body is
Mm.
because, like you said, I was holding on to things from early childhood and things that happened to me as a teenager.
Right.
Um, and so it's an interesting subject, but we won't even go down that path. It is kind of interesting to see and to learn everybody
Mm.
else's experience with how their bodies kind of revolted on them to get
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it can be so cathartic when you realize that as well, and you start to because when you start any kind of change work, I don't know if you found this as well when you sort of went through it, but there's once you start it, you peel back a little bit, and you realize something's changed, and then you get a little bit of fear because you think, well, this is who I'm used to being.
Yeah,
Who am I going to be without this stuff? And so I know in my coaching practice, I've worked with people who they will fight tooth and nail to keep hold of some of this stuff because they'd rather keep hold of that than risk being somebody that they're not sure who it's going to be. So that's fear of the unknown. But the unknown is themselves. I find that sort of paradox very, very interesting because I've to this day, I mean, it is possible, but to this day, I've never met anybody who's made those changes or done that self work who came out the other end and went, "No, that was a mistake."
yeah,
You
never.
know,
I've never heard that.
everybody has a positive. Everybody has that smile that you just got. It's such a different. It's so hard to explain to people, but it is it's an awakening moment and it's joyous. And life should be about joy. It's too short to be anything else. If you're not, I've said this so many times to so many people, but if you're not doing, if what you're doing isn't bringing you joy, it's the wrong thing. Do something else. Life can be hard work. What you're doing can be hard work, but if the end result isn't joy,
Then
you know,
you're
why,
doing it.
why, why do it? Why
Yeah.
do something else? Life's too short to do something that you don't want to do. You know.
Exactly. And I had made that decision before I even knew that I needed to change. When I was
Mm.
21, I remember I was working in the hospital. That was one of the many hats that I wore. I think it was labor and delivery. I was working at that point,
Oh
and
wow.
um, just watching the nurses that had been there for 20 plus years. One of the
Mm.
nurses, I think my charge nurse, was the nurse that helped deliver me. So that lets you know.
Wow.
Yeah, and just seeing how miserable they were,
Mm.
I said, I don't want this.
Yeah.
This is not what I want. And then some of the mentors that I had at that point that were nurses were telling me, don't keep pursuing this. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Mm.
Um, and I've realized just over this, since I started my change work, that I had adopted this identity of Nurse Leah based off of me having a little faux pas with my sister when I was 4 and she was 2, and I got a hold of the cough syrup and drugged her up real good. And based off of that, my family was like, "Oh, Leah's a little nurse. Her sister said she wasn't feeling good, so she gave her the cough syrup." And I realized I didn't even want to be a nurse. That's not who I
Mm.
wanted to be. Um, And just coming to those realizations have been such a freeing thing for me. Um,
Good.
and other people that I've talked to and coached, it's like, yeah, you know what? I see what you mean. I didn't really want to do that. That was somebody else's idea for me.
Yeah,
Um,
that, you know, that's a really key thing to realize as well, is that particularly at the moment with what we do and with the online sort of community as well, it's so easy to get caught up in aiming for somebody else's idea of success.
mhm.
And there's that whole, you know, there are 2 or 3 strands of what is quote unquote acceptable success, but that's not necessarily who you are inside, you know. And you can spend your life strive. I mean, we hear it all the time, people striving for success, they get it and they're miserable. Well, it's because it's somebody else's idea of what they should be striving for. You know, if it's not, you need to know what drives you. You know, I mean, it's popular to say, you know, what is my why?
Yeah,
You know, but that, I mean, but the thing is, it's that question and is asked quite flippantly a lot of the time, but it's a really foundational question, and people sort of spend 5 minutes thinking about it. Well, it should take a lot longer than 5 minutes to get that, to get under the layers of conditioning that tell you that you want a Ferrari, you know,
mhm,
because your purpose in life predates the invention of the car.
for sure.
So that is not your purpose in life is not to buy a Ferrari. That might be a nice side effect and a nice, you know, but your purpose has to predate that, and it has to be something that relates to you as an individual, but human beings as a species, because we have a purpose as a species as well as we do as individuals, and they have to relate. So it can't be anything to do with something that didn't exist at that point.
Right.
I mean, that's that's a theory, and it's my theory, but it works for me, I guess. But there'll be, but it's but we tend to build our careers quite flippantly on what is socially acceptable in the very small period of time that we're of working age. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm 45. I've probably got another 25 years of work ahead of me. So very, in the grand scheme of things, it's a blink of an eye. And yet I'm talking about, well, I want to do this and that and this and that, and this is my purpose. And well, what I want to do and what might affect a few people for the next decade, 30 years, 40 years down the line might be completely irrelevant. It might mean nothing, you know. So one thing that I'm interested in at the moment, and I'm still kind of, as you can tell, still sort of formulating this idea, is how do I peel that back, and I'm because I'm middle-aged and I'm going through a midlife crisis. What is my legacy going to be, and do I want to leave a legacy? That's the first thing. Or because I'm one of those people, I'm a bit of a dichotomy. I want to help a lot of people, but I also want to be completely anonymous. But I want the credit because I'm human, and we all want credit for what we're good at. And again, you know, it's having that awareness that as human beings, I'm aware that what just came out of my mouth is not perfect.
Right.
You know, there's an awful lot of ego wrapped up in what I just said, but it's also embracing the fact that we're not perfect and we do have these things, and how do we work with them, how do we work around them, and how do we say that has no place in coaching somebody else or whatever, or helping other people. You know, it's that all time question: is there any such thing as altruism? You know,
Mhm.
does anybody ever act altruistically? um there's no right answer to that question, I don't think.
And it's not because, I literally last week just took this personality test and it said that
Mm,
I had altruistic traits and that I put other people before me. And I know that that's something that I do,
mm,
but I also know as a human being that if it came down to it, I'm gonna choose me, period. If it came
Yeah,
down to
that's it. And but the other thing as well with that is there's a theory, and again, I do a lot with neuro-linguistic programming, and as you'll know, one of the premises of neuro-linguistic programming is, everything we do is for a purpose, and that purpose serves us.
exactly.
So if you're doing something altruistically, it's because you're running a pattern that provides you with a feedback, and that's an emotional feedback, which is probably a good feeling because you've done something nice.
Mhm.
Well, if you weren't getting that feedback loop, would
That'd
you
be
have
good.
necessarily made that decision? I don't know the answer. It depends on who you're talking to, but I would suggest that you make those decisions subconsciously. But yeah, it's an interesting question. I certainly enjoy coaching people. I certainly like the feedback I get from that. Um, does that actually matter if you're helping people? That's the other question. So, so I
No,
feel like I'm bringing up a lot more questions than
well, no, because I'm just
anything
thinking
else.
about it. It's like, I guess I'm somebody that believes that certain people are hardwired to be um, transformers in other
Mm,
people's lives. It's just something inertly within us that makes us want to help
mm,
people along with their transformations and things like that. Whereas you like online, the space right now with coaching, not everybody's heart or they're not heart centered when it comes to coaching. It's more
yeah.
money driven or whatnot.
Yeah,
And so,
it's so nice to hear you say that, because I was talking to I do a podcast every week for um, people who are starting up small businesses. I do it with a business coach. I do the sort of the life coaching, psychological side of stuff. He does all the nuts and bolts of the business. But we were talking about that exact same thing, and I got into a bit of a debate on a coaching forum where somebody posted and said about high ticket clients. You'll have seen this yourself. Everything on these forums at the moment is get high ticket clients for this, that, and the other. And I went on and said, well, the people I coach, they can't afford a high ticket price. Why would I want to eliminate all of those people that need help when my driver is to help people? My key value, my key driver is helping people.
exactly.
As by the sound of it, yours is. Um, why would I be interested in that when it's reducing a client base, reducing the effectiveness of the coaching, all to give somebody I've never met a load of cash for a course? It's not coaching, it's not helping people. Selling somebody a course and saying, don't bother me with it, now you've bought it, it's not helping anybody.
No,
That's just selling them a course.
exactly. Because a lot of the times you will buy a course and you don't even use it. You don't
No.
go through, you don't apply it. There's no action.
Mm,
Um, and you don't even know if the person is getting a transformation.
no,
And
that's
so,
right.
as a coach, and I'm a fellow NLP peer too.
Mm,
So knowing that my core driver is to actually see some transformation. I don't feel
mm,
like I've effectively coached or did an NLP session without seeing some form of transformation.
yeah,
And it doesn't have to be major. And I don't. It's not ego driven. It's how am I being effective?
yeah,
If you come to me
absolutely.
with a problem and you're trusting me, you're putting your trust in me to help you.
Mm,
If I don't see or feel or hear
yeah,
that
absolutely.
what I'm doing is effective, then what's the point? What's the
Yeah,
point?
exactly. Yeah,
So
yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's, I don't know what you think, but um, for me, I've always thought that's why so many people who have done this kind of change work on themselves are attracted to that industry.
mhm.
and attracted to the sort of the coaching side of things, because they understand the difference it makes. And once you've felt it in yourself, there's a shift,
Definitely.
and you understand the difference it makes. Very hard to explain to somebody who's not gone through that process, the difference it makes, until you see it. And I think that's why a lot of what we're seeing online at the moment is going unchallenged, because it's people who haven't gone through that process trying to sell to other people who haven't gone through that process. And as soon as they do, that's going to die off, or at least I hope it will, because I think it's disingenuous. I think it's difficult for the industry. I don't know how it is in the States, but in the UK, coaching is completely unregulated.
Oh,
So
it's the same
yeah,
thing.
so you can get people who have done a weekend course with a certificate, walking around saying, I've got a certificate, which means nothing, it's a franchise. Pitching or talking to clients, and then you've got people like us who have been doing it for years who don't have that certificate, but do a lot more sort of in-depth work. And I think there's a real issue with coaching, because where that exists, what does a client do? Somebody who needs the help, where do they go? They see a certificate, they don't know enough about it to know that it's unregulated. They don't know what that means, and they don't know what questions to ask to find out, is this the kind of coaching that I need? Is this coach the right coach for me? Because that's the other thing, is not everyone's the same. Not everybody works the same way. Not everyone's going to gel the same way. And some potential clients are looking for more of a friend, or an excuse, someone to blame when they don't change, because of that fear thing they've got in that comfort zone. And someone said, you need to go and see a coach. And they want to be able to say, it wasn't my fault. Well,
Yep.
not on my watch. You're going to change if you, you know, if you've said you want to change, you're going to change. And and I think that's important. Is too many people are looking for that kind of sympathetic friend relationship, and they don't know enough about the coaching process to know that it's not a therapy, it's results driven, and it makes a difference, but they've got to do the work.
Exactly.
And that's my coaching rant, I'm afraid. But
it's 100% on point, because I've had and seen even a friend of mine start a coaching business. And I'm someone, I'll say, I'll put my hand up. For me, I looked at, doing certifications and stuff as a way to prove that you're educated. And I let that hold me back from actually running with it, because I was like, well, are people going to take me serious? I don't have this. And then I would see people that didn't have that same mindset as me jumping full stream ahead
yeah.
and call themselves coaches without having that format. You're right. Coaching is results driven. And there is a definite, if you're doing it right, format that needs to be followed.
Yeah.
But we'll go down the rabbit hole with this. So yeah, I don't even want to go any more into it, because I'll be on a soapbox for an hour.
Yeah, me too. It's an interesting problem, I think, that is getting worse,
Yeah.
because it's such an easy industry to get into. I mean, the way I got around it was I joined a trade association. So I'm able to sort of say, well, these are the standards that I have to uphold to be a member of this association. And that's how I sort of got around that. But it can be uncomfortable to have those conversations, because it means that we end up having to educate people before we can tell them about the benefits of what we do. It adds a complete extra layer to getting the word out there about who we are and how we work that other industries don't necessarily have to have. So yeah.
And I'm seeing people now doing like YouTube videos on how to pick the right coach for you. And, yeah, that's important for people to know.
Yeah.
For sure. But you're right. There are people out there that just need that friendship, and that's not what coaching is about.
Yeah. You don't pay your friends. I think that's the,
Not at all. So.
I'm at the moment, I'm writing a consumer guide to life coaching. And that's one of the things that I wrote it today actually. Yeah, you don't pay your friends. You are effectively, you are employing your coach to help you achieve a result.
Yes.
And you
Exactly.
have to go into it with that mindset, because otherwise, I mean, it's not good for you and it's not good for your coach.
No.
It really isn't. So
With the boundaries, there has to be boundaries, and people, it's hard when you blur those lines. That's when you get I don't know, hurt feelings and accusations and things. So it's just boundaries are key in coaching, from both sides. So, and you will feel, if you're with a coach for a while, and this is another thing too. The coach that you start out with is not going to be the coach that you end with. If you're evolving as a person, the level of coaching that you get is going to evolve as well.
Yeah.
And so people need to understand that as well. You're right. It's your coach is, for all intents and purposes, an employee.
Yeah.
You're there for a purpose. And whatever that purpose is, once they serve it, then you move on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So with that being said, what piece of advice would you give my listeners, our listeners for this episode, that might be, changing tracks or wanting to change tracks?
I think there are three things that really have made a difference to me and the sort of speed of making any change for me. The first is, as I mentioned earlier on, reading. I'm a real avid reader. If you want to make any kind of change, read up. Get as, I mean, I'll hold my hands up. I'll very often overdo the reading on a certain subject, but limit yourself to 3 or 4 books. I'm a big fan of the classic texts because they tend to have stood the test of time. They're very easy to implement. So for self-help books, Think and Grow Rich is probably the only one you'll ever need, as far as I'm concerned. That's where I sort of come from with that. But read up, specialist knowledge in whatever you're doing. If you want to change careers, find out about that career before you make the jump, so that you know what you don't know, and then you can go out and find it out and learn it and do whatever you need. The second thing is to journal. One thing that I probably didn't mention earlier on was with the chronic fatigue, one of the things that speeded up my recovery was I journaled constantly. It really makes a difference. It gets all that stuff that's stuck inside, gets it out. Because once you put it on paper, you can't ignore it. It's there, it's in front of you. You read it again in a week and you go, oh my God, I'm awful. Who am I? Who wrote this stuff? So, I mean, I've still got my journals from that time, and I was just the stuff that was coming out of me at that point. But journal, and I'm not one for, get one of these journals with questions in to answer or anything like that. Just sit with a pen and paper and write until you can't write anymore. Because the stuff that comes out is the stuff that you need to come out. And then there's a layer under that and a layer under that. And I probably journaled for a solid 12 months. And some of those days, because I was doing nothing else, some of those days I was journaling for 8 hours a day. And just sat with a pen and paper, just writing and writing and writing. And it's so cathartic. So set yourself some time every day and just write. And don't throw it away because it's interesting for later. But also you'll see how far you've come and you'll see where you've changed. But what you'll find is that the same things will come up over and over again, but you won't realize until you read it back and go, right, there's a pattern there, there's an issue, that's it, focus, do something about that. And the third thing, which I do every day now and have done for years, is meditation. And just sit for at least 20 minutes every morning with no sound, nothing. Set a timer if you have to, but make it part of your routine, because again, it's that ability to quieten what's going on, quieten the chatter, slow down those pictures and those movies and just say, right, this is me for a minute. And things crop up and you'll solve problems, you'll recognize thoughts, you'll see those. One thing that this is quick. I'm conscious of your time, but one of the things that I realized when I was meditating was I've got these little voices, and the one that tells me what to do and puts me down constantly, because we've all got one of those, it always sits on the right hand side, just about there. Right, okay, well, what happens if I move it to the front or further down? And I was able to move it, and now that voice, I can ignore it because it's not there. But I didn't even know that existed until I started meditating, because when you're still, you can hear it.
Yeah.
It's going all the time, But once you know that stuff's there, and we've all got it, it's like, you'll know yourself, particularly with the NLP, working with clients, they've got no idea that they're seeing these pictures flying around until you say, slow the pictures down. And suddenly they go, okay. Now that, to them, they haven't realized it, but to them, that's a life-changing moment, because you've made them aware of something that has always been with them, has been affecting their lives in really detrimental ways in some instances, but you've just given them a way to recognize it and say, step back from it. You can look at this objectively now because you can control it. And meditation, I found, did that for me. So there are three things that I'd recommend to anybody: is read constantly. And again, you said earlier on about Audible. If you don't like reading books, get an Audible account. Journal and meditate.
And those are three things that I've recently started the journaling.
How are you finding it?
Just like you said, when I read back some of the stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking that day? But it's very informative for me, I guess, to see the changes that I've made just in a very short amount of time. And it's been beneficial. So I've definitely.
Yeah. It really supercharges any progress, I think, journaling. It's kind of a special thing. It really is. I find it really, really useful.
It is. And then, I looked at it as, if somebody reads back on these journals in my family from years ago or years down the line, it would give them a good insight of, knowing who I was and how I evolved over time. So, that was an interesting thing for me, just a thought too, that I was like, oh, you hear about people finding journals from their great grandmothers and stuff like that. So I just thought it was interesting to start that practice too. So, yeah. Well, can you let the listeners know how to find you on social media, website?
Yeah, sure. I've got a website which is www.skypelifecoach.uk, which I registered before people started using Zoom. So I've also now, so I've now got. I'm also at. It's the same website, zoomlifecoach.uk as well, and you can find me on Facebook at John Child Skype Life Coach.
Okay, awesome.
They're the best ways. I'm on Twitter as well, but I'm not on there as much, and I'm just known as Tweeting John.
Okay,
So
awesome.
yeah.
Well, it has been a pleasure having you come
Well,
on and share your
it's
story.
do you know it's been fantastic. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I know we ended up with quite a wide ranging and rambling conversation there, but hopefully it's been useful and been interesting to people that have tuned in as well. And yeah, I really appreciated it. And what a fantastic podcast. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.